Hey there, welcome everybody. This is Tracee Garner. We are writing the book, 52-Week Challenge, Write the Book with Tracee. I am really excited today because I have a special guest and I don't know to try because I'm new to YouTube and we are some other authors. Come on and join us. He had a 34-year career with the government, including the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Navy. And one day, David decided to settle down and write his book. His nonfiction books include Taking God to Work, which has been really popular and a phenomenal book about finding your like and maybe your love in work again, The Keys to Ultimate Success, The Accidental Missionary, A Gringo's Love Affair with Peru, and Sabbatical of the Mind, The Journey from Anxiety to Peace. And as we talk more with David, you'll see that he, through his anxiety and dealing with that, he really started to come up with these stories and these ideas in order to cope and alleviate some of that, which I think is wonderful. I think all of us have something that we're dealing with and that we're working through our writing, and it has been a real, sanity saver for us. So David also writes devotionals for Guideposts magazine, contributing to 3 books in the All God's Creatures one-year devotional series. And he also has 2 fiction books. One is Driver Confessional and Stock Car Inferno. So welcome, David. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm so happy to have you. I love your background. It's awesome. It's so awesome. Thanks for coming on today.
Tracee, thank you so much for having me. I love talking to you, and so I'm excited to be on your show.
Great. So first of all, I just wanted to, get at some of the impetus and the beginnings of like how you came up with this new book. And also, while we're talking about your book, obviously an opportunity to promote that, but also talk about, some of the things that led you to get into nonfiction writing and where you're going and how you really start off in your writing process.
Okay, Tracee. Well, this particular book has an interesting genesis. I think many of us who try to write books that will positively impact others, we start with God and we ask him, hey, what should I write next? And he gave me the ideas for my previous books. And I felt like he was saying, you've been talking to me a lot about a bigger audience, Dave. Well, why don't you look and see which books have been useful to people that are currently on the top of the charts for Christian fiction and nonfiction. So I looked and I saw this book called Girl Wash Your Face. And I thought that was a very good title. I thought it was interesting. And so I went to me that she was able to capture all of these misconceptions and lies that maybe she had believed one time or another in her life, and then flipped those and looked at what was really true as opposed to that. And, some Christian reviewers faulted her because she didn't pay enough homage to the fact that God's really in charge of our life. But her point was a little bit different from that. And it was each of us is in charge of our own happiness. So I understood what she was saying. And, I didn't read the whole book like thinking, oh, she's so wrong. She really did have a lot of great points in there. So I said, what we need is a book like that focuses on men. And what are the things that I have believed? What are the lies that have one point or another in my life have slowed me down from accomplishing the things I wanted to do, from being the person I wanted to be? And so I started working on those and looking at those. And, most nonfiction, you would start with probably an outline and outline a lot of the major points you wanted to make. And then as you go along and you get inspiration from one place to another and you do your research, you fill out that outline. Well, this was totally different in a way because what I did was I just looked at one lie after another and they were each sort of individual and self-contained chapters. And then I looked at, did I have any that were so similar that they should be combined? And I threw out some that just, I thought, this may be a lie, but it's a boring one. So I don't think anybody'd like to hear about it. So I tried to take the best ones, and I still have 31 chapters, which some people will think is off-putting. Oh, wow, but they're short and they do get to the point. And unlike the other book I read, I start each chapter with a scripture verse that in some way bears on the lie and the flip of that, the truth that kind of set me free.
That is awesome. I mean, I think that no matter what, I always say there's an audience, for everything. And that even, with the long chapters, it can really become a book of reference, almost like one of your devotionals where you can pick and choose maybe some of the lives that you may be experiencing at any given time, and then just go to that and just flip to that chapter and really get some input and motivation and clarity about whatever you're going through. Everybody goes through so many different things, and so that's a really good thing to have and to refer to it over and over again. So I agree that I also heard about Girl Wash Your Face. Some of the books, and this question isn't as planned as I was thinking, but one thing that came to me when you were talking is that there's this shock value with some of the books. As soon as you open the book, it's like, what are you effing doing? And I'm just kind of like, wow, I'm not doing anything. And I close the book and toss it because I'm just so, what do you think about that? Totally unplanned question that kind of came to me, but I've been thinking about it. Is that really resonating with people? Is that kind of, curse you into motivation? What are your thoughts on some of that stuff?
Well, there's a difference between a Christian book and a secular book. And right now I know what you mean, and I can think of some of the titles that you're probably thinking about, where people for shock value try to get you into their idea and into their thoughts. But Christian books, something I heard again at a recent conference is they point you to God, and they give you hope. And so some of those books may give you hope, but they don't necessarily point you to God. Mm-hmm. And, my book, I would say, is as graphic as the Bible in some places. And that should scare you if you've been brought up in a very puritanical background. But, I'm talking, to guys and to the women who love them. And, porn is a problem. Guys' obsession with sex is a problem. And I talk about that in the book, about, how that can really derail your life. I talk about addictions, and, those are not pretty. Some of the stories, well, I bring up many, many stories throughout because I think that's a lot more interesting than me preaching to someone about what's right and wrong. I think that's kind of not only off-putting, but also boring. So a friend of mine, and I use this story with his permission, and I use his real name, which is unusual in the book because I changed a lot of the names of people I came in contact with through work or one thing or another. But Steve was from my hometown, and he was a star baseball player, but he had a love of alcohol. And he was having some trouble in his job, even in his 20s, where he would just say, I've worked 6 hours, and now I'm going to take off and go to the Cincinnati Reds ballpark and watch a game and drink a lot of beer. Mm-hmm. So he buzzed himself down to Cincinnati to the game one afternoon, and he drank himself silly, and he had some on his way. Mm-hmm. And then when he got there, he drank more, and he either walked or jumped off the parking garage at the ballpark. Mm-hmm. And fell on some railroad tracks, and he ended up a quadriplegic as a result of that. And it's in the context of my chapter about the fact that, we can choose our sin, but we can't choose our consequences. And that's really an issue, and for him, he didn't get the message from all that. He still drank after that was over for a few more years. And finally, God got a hold of him through an occupational training program, where it's actually the state of Ohio came out and said, hey, you're going to be in this situation for a while. Why don't you go back to college? And so he did, and that gave him the understanding of how alcohol was preventing him from becoming his best person. And then he turned that all around, and for years went to the VA and led AA meetings there and helped other people to get rid of their alcohol problem. So, that's to me a very inspiring story, when someone can take even their own mistakes and let God flip it around to where they're helping and inspiration to a ton of other people.
That's right. That's awesome. What a great story. That's wonderful. And how, God can use us, even in our brokenness, to heal and help others, and even prevent them, from following the same path and making the same poor decisions. What particular lie is that for that particular story?
Yeah, that was My Sin Doesn't Smell So Bad is the title of that chapter. Because I think we all think we're not in that much, that much of a situation. And, and I also have a chapter about addiction, and I think it plays in there a little bit too. And it's I'm not addicted is the lie there. And, I went through my battles with alcohol as well as a young man, because I thought that's what you did to have fun. That was the way you handled it. And as I went along, I never got to the point where I would miss work, or where I would get into a car accident, or drive super drunk or something like that. But when I wanted to get it out of my life, I could not do that by myself.
Mm.
And I think people have to come to that realization that you don't have to hit a rock bottom where you lose your family, you lose your job, before you give up your addictions. And so my story is a little different than his. It doesn't have the same extreme to it, but it's still every bit as valid. And there's a lot of people out there who alcohol is just as destructive to them, even though they've not seen their whole life blow up from it.
Right, and I think it also are issues. Well, I'm bad, but I'm not that bad, And when you're really just, one poor decision away from it's becoming that bad, and so it's like sin is sin. It's all bad, Just because you didn't have the experience, you didn't have the accident, you still have full use of your limbs. Sometimes it also requires an extra thing, I think, to get our attention. And sometimes that can be, like, well, yours wasn't that bad because maybe you're paying a little more attention. Maybe you didn't make such poor decisions, but, it could escalate at any moment to becoming that bad. But it's all bad. It's all bad. And so I think for women also, comparison to one another, who's doing well, who's doing better, is also an issue and a lie that, if I could, say for women and people in general, not just women, but everybody. So in my last video, one of my last videos in January, I was talking about two kinds of writers, for fiction, because you write fiction also, which is great, like I do. In fiction, you're kind of this pantser or a plotter. Those are the labels that we use to describe how people write, whether you write by the seat of your pants or you really take time to plot out. Do you think that is the same? I know you touched on it at the beginning, right after the intro, but do you think that it can also fit, not as a pantser plot or a universal application, whatever you write?
Well, I think it would be very difficult to write nonfiction completely as a pantser. Even in my fiction, though, I'm probably the hybrid, which maybe a lot of us are, where answer. But we have the story in our mind. We think about the story maybe for months before we actually start writing. We have an idea of who the main characters are. And to me, that's one of the biggest points, because then you kind of know what you can do with them and where they're going and where the story's going. And in the arc of a nonfiction book, you're still hoping to take people on a journey from where you start and what your intentions are to where you actually get to. And, in my book, The Accidental Missionary, I was telling someone else's story, which was wonderful. I wrote it with David Bredeman, and he had been a missionary for 15 years down in Peru, and then a couple more years where he was being trained, and he was in Ecuador and different places, but basically a 17-year journey of being a missionary. And I knew that his story had a surprising ending, and it wasn't entirely positive. And so I had an idea of where I wanted to take people, but it was really his story. So we got together, and over the phone mainly, although we did see each other a few times. I spent a weekend down with his wife and he at their place in the Shenandoahs, which was beautiful. But he told me all these stories that were not necessarily connected. And so my job was really to show the arc of his life and of his missionary journey, and why it kind of came to be as it did. And I gave hints throughout, so it's not a mystery where you go like, oh no, the butler did it, and there wasn't even a butler in the story until the last scene. But on the other hand, he accomplished an amazing amount of stuff. He was an amazing man. He still is. And he helped a lot of people. And I think that comes across in his story. But, he almost saw a friend of his get killed in a motorcycle accident. They were on the going through the mountains and the Andes, and his friend was not driving very safely, and it was a small road, and they went around a corner on the mountain, and he just got launched by a taxi driver. And he sees his friend flying over top of the car,
Oh
and
my
then he's like, the man's got to be dead. And then the guy was afraid he was going to get run over. So after all that, he jumped up and ran back to their bus. And he had some injuries, including his thumb was all messed up, but then God miraculously healed him of the thumb injury on their way to the hospital, or at the hospital. And then he had some, bruises, and, some, his head got cut and stuff. But, the guy ended up living and got on the plane later that night. So, it was a miraculous provision, really. And to tell story after story like that of his was wonderful too.
That's great. And that brings up another question of just, collaborating with another author to tell these kinds of stories. How was that process? And, what was it like? Would you like to do it again? I have some own thoughts about collaborating that I tried once. Obviously, that book hasn't come out because it's not done, but I think a lot of writers, are able to really work together and to write, and you're kind of pulling this story. It sounds like you might have worked by yourself a lot with him giving you lots of stuff, so you weren't like actively collaborating, but more of kind of a, you do your part and then show him, and then get feedback and stuff. But talk about that process, and how
Well,
that for
yeah,
you.
I actually did 3 collaborations already in my four years or so of writing. It was the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
It was the good. And I think that was for exactly the reason you said. Basically, he told me what he wanted to say. We prayed a lot too, but he told me what he wanted to say. God filled in the details, and I'd give it to him, and he'd go, I never even told you that, but you were able to figure it out and write it. And I think that was the Holy Spirit kind of leading me as I wrote. So that was neat. And then I would make a lot of mistakes because a lot of the names are Spanish names, or places I've never heard of or been to, maybe having references back, hundreds and hundreds of years. So he was able to fix that, and then I would, do that again, and we just passed stuff back and forth a few times to get it right. But I collaborated with my pastor, who I'll probably be excommunicated for telling this story, but we wrote Taking God to Work together, and by far it's my most widely read book. And he had previously written a bestseller about weight loss too, so he already had a big following. But our book took a year, and it was very, very difficult. We started out with a teaching series that he did at church, and then I got all the notes from that. I wrote the chapters, filling in a lot of stories because his notes were like a sermon, and people like to read fun kind of anecdotes and things as well. Still had a lot of scripture in it. But we also had growth groups that looked through the questions, gave us feedback that was invaluable, but it was a very difficult process. And he was a guy with a huge busy schedule. And so if I would give him something and ask him questions, I might not hear from him for a week and a half or 2 weeks. And that was just excruciating for an author. And God taught me a lot through that, which was, you can't do anything about that. Go on to the next chapter, just forget about it. It'll come back, and he always did, he always got me what I needed, but he couldn't always do it on my timetable. And, in that book was very rewarding. When I was done, it was like the most rewarding experience to see that one in print, because I knew how hard it had come,
Mm-hmm.
But I also had a collaboration experience with a friend who will remain nameless, who is a corporate guy. And he had an idea for a Christian book, and his idea was vague. And and he was paying me, to ghostwrite it for him. And we spent like 3 months, and really all the hours he had contracted with me to write, to get nowhere. I mean, basically, he would give me some ideas, and they were so high level and so vague. I'd give him something back, and he'd go like, no, that's not it at all, really. And he was trying to write a book about the plan of salvation for people who had no Western background, and so knew nothing about Christianity. Well, it seemed like a very noble goal, but I never figured out what he was trying to do. And finally, he paid me half the money. I went away thrilled to be away from the project. And what I learned from that was, if you're going to collaborate with someone, the scripture, you can't walk with someone unless you agree. You have to have a shared vision of what the book is going to be and what the basic idea is. Because if you don't even have that, and if the person can't give you an outline that says, here's the 10 chapters or the 5 chapters or the 30 chapters, and, here's about what we're going to do, then you're probably never going to get there. It's just too painful to wander in the dark with someone else for, a year, and then figure out that you're not going to do it. So anyway, that's my collaboration stories.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's some great tips in there about, different things of knowing what you're after and what the end result is. My own just really short collaboration story is I started, collaborating with someone who worked with me and helped me, one of my caregivers. And, she wanted to be a writer. When we met each other, she thought, I was a godsend, and, because she wanted to write, and I was already writing, having 12, 13 books. And it just kind of fell out, because what really happened was that, she wanted to have some ideas in the writing, but didn't actually want to do any of the work. And so I think that it just kind of fell apart. And also, we weren't in agreement on the direction. I started out very excited about the story, but then it was taking this kind of horror genre turn, and I've never written horror. I don't like horror. I don't like being scared. So I think that that's where the agreement part that you're speaking of came in, and it just, it was just awkward. So it's going to be some really bizarre things. We were really excited when we first started, like, I'm going to Atlanta in March, and I'll stop by Tyler Perry Studios, and here, throw it out the window, Tyler Perry, please take my script. And so just kind of fell apart. But one thing that did come out of it that I'm really thankful for is just, I got ideas for a book. Needless to say, she's no longer my caregiver, but, and for a different reason. She was great. But the point is that I got an idea about working with all of these different people, and kind of some of the humorous stories that come out of, having to be cared for and needing help. And even, the older set of people that have helped me in my daily life, and the kind of the younger millennials that I've had to work with. And just kind of, when I think back on some of them, they're just hilarious stories that you would not believe. So I've been thinking about, culminating that into a book.
That
too.
sounds
So
great.
at least I got, something out of that, even though our shared goal didn't come to fruition. So you've written like 7 books, up to now. Is that right? 7 books so far?
Yeah, I don't even try to count because
Okay.
it's too bizarre to throw in your guideposts and one thing and another. So
Okay. Well, and 7 books and like a bunch of articles and stuff like that too. How do you keep the process interesting and fresh and kind of keep returning to that cursor that blinks at you like, are you ready? What are you going to do? What do you got? So how do you keep that process interesting? And would you say it's more of a love for you of writing and of telling stories and creating? Or do you feel it's more of a calling on your life to really do that and to use your writing as a vehicle for greater messages, than yourself and just entertaining?
yeah, I think it's both a candy mint and a breath mint. I have always wanted to be a writer. I was a journalism student in college, my undergrad. Couldn't find a job at a newspaper when I first got out, so I went to work for the government. I, could never get away from the golden handcuffs of having a real reliable job and all that. I found I couldn't write well at night after putting in a full day at work, and I applaud people who can. I think it's an amazing amount of endurance and ability. But me dressing myself and then getting to work and getting dinner at night was about all I could handle. That, and of course, my 75 hours of television per week. Uh, but eventually, I retired, and God put it on my heart that this was now my time to get into writing. And I love both fiction and nonfiction, and I've been a little slow in, saying, "Oh, I'm going to do this or do that." And for you to be really successful, you have to build a brand. And I think it's very hard to build a brand in both areas. I have, been experimenting with various tools like Book Funnel to build my list. But I'm really finding out I have to have 2 lists. I have to have 2 sets of information going out because, frankly, a lot of the people who read my Christian suspense still don't want to hear blatant messages about God and about my nonfiction books. They'd really, one guy referred to it as rubbish. He was from Australia, so that is. But anyway, he was direct. So I think that's really, and one kind of seems like work after you do it too long, like for months and months, and the book's about ready to come out. So then it's like going back to love and fun when you switch back over. And, fiction, I have 2 fiction books, which I'm in the middle of writing. And I'm excited about the next one that's coming out. It's going to be called A Baby's Right to Choose. And it is suspense. It is, you won't want to read it because you're don't like fear or dealing with scary issues, Tracee. But for those who do, it's I think it's going to be a lot of fun and entertaining as well. But I like fiction that has a message, and all of my books. I do try to point people to God, and I also look at regular people of faith who are existing in a world that isn't dominated really by faith and by God. There's a lot of evil out there. There's a lot of people who just don't know and need to hear about the good news of Christ. So, one of my stories, the driver confessional, I Ubered for 5 months in order to get stories to put in there. And what I found was there's a lot of people that get in your car that are wonderful people. And then there's a few real evil people to get in your car and will share that with you in the car. And so that made it easy to write the book afterwards because it just reminded me of what human nature is.
Wow, that's a great hands-on research thing to do. And I think it's almost like probably Uber's like a traveling confession hall, right? You just kind of get in there, you dump all your stuff, and then you exit. It's like, oh, here, carry this off for me. So that's really interesting that you would, take the time to really venture out and do that. I never would have thought of that. But I imagine, meeting so many people and hearing some of the stories is really fun until you, I guess, maybe, you come across a serial killer or something or whatever he did
Well,
before he got in your car.
yeah,
So,
it's hilarious. I mean, I had one older couple, and we went to I was picking them up from the grocery, and the woman was like really stalling, and I didn't know why. But they were like from the islands or something. They had these big accents and, kind of colorful people, in the way they talk. And this lady gets in, and she's like, "What were you doing in there? What were you staying in there?" And they're having this big fight. And then he is diabetic and bought 2 donuts behind her back, and she was just furious. And they're older, so they got all the traits of older people that can be kind of funny from time to time. So he is outside the door, like waving the donuts at her to just taunt her, and then he takes one out and he takes a huge bite, and I'm like, oh no, and I see it's a jelly donut in my rearview mirror. I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be bad. So he gets in, and they go jawing back and forth, and I start trying to get him home as quickly as possible. And she ends up stuffing that jelly donut in the man's face. And I'm like, my car, it's jelly. I mean, it was hilarious. And it was just a really funny scene. And I put that in the book because, you have to when you
yeah.
story like that's beautiful, but then I saw God. He said, turn on the love music channel, because I usually just played this innocuous background music. So I changed over. I had Sirius XM to the love channel. And by the time they got out of there, they were apologizing and they were all lovey-dovey. And, there, I was just like, God, this is the most hilarious thing I think I've ever seen.
That is so funny. Wow, that's a really great story. I can't wait to read it and really get the gist of it. It's like, crazy couples in cars, shoving donuts, So it's kind of funny. Thanks for that story. That's great. So yeah, you don't know what you're gonna, and here you said you were just doing this for a research project, right? Like what an expensive, thing to have to do. Now you have to get your car shampooed and all kinds of.
Well, actually, it was the opposite. It's the only research I've ever done for a book that really paid off so far, because
That's
you
good.
get paid for each ride you give.
Well, now if your books tank, I guess you could just go back to doing that.
I know, I've always got Uber.
Yes, that's right. Alrighty. So, so you mentioned that you were such a long time, and you mentioned the anxiety and the issues that you were having. Why don't you talk about that, briefly, as far as, why that was, what do you think contributed to that? And, and also I was thinking, what the book that you wrote with Pastor Reynolds, would that have been helpful to you in your workplace situation at that time? Was that kind of a book that you needed in order to medicate? It would have been helpful and cathartic for you to have.
Yeah, the whole genesis of the book Sabbatical of the Mind was, I worked for most of my career in very older state agencies. I was with the Navy for 20 years. It was so well run, so well organized. And then for some reason, I thought, I'm kind of bored. I could do my job in like 4 hours a day, and I'm sitting at my desk bored. And I was like a big wheel with policy and DoD for research and development and grants. So I was on these interagency and inter-service panels, and you'd think it would be interesting. But I'd just done it a long time, and it was really easy to me. So I went to Homeland Security, and that agency was just pure chaos when I went. It was already almost 5 years old, but it was really a mess. And so I inherited a buying division that was in total disarray. There were people screaming at each other in the hallways. They were yelling at their customers on the phone. It was so unprofessional, and just and people came from different agencies and were thrown together in Homeland Security, and everybody wanted to do it the way they had been trained. Some of these people had been in government for 20 years or 25 years. They did not want to hear that they weren't doing it right, or that they weren't doing it the Homeland Security way. So that caused a lot of upset in me personally. I'm the person that my colleagues there, my close friends, did not know I was having anxiety. They said later, wow, you kept that hid really well. But like I was acrophobic, and it would manifest itself like it was time for me to go up in the to the executive suites in the building on the 11th floor or something. And they had this big, beautiful panoramic view from the conference room. And I would be scared to death to go up there. And at one point, I came close to having a heart attack or a nervous breakdown in a meeting with some investigators. And they weren't investigating me, thank God, but I was still really, really nervous to talk to them. And everybody there got really scared because it looked like I was really having an episode. And it turns out it was all anxiety. It was a panic attack. And God, I think, led me through all that so I'd be able to help other people. But I came to the conclusion I had to quit my job. And I did, which nobody does in their later years of government employment. But I did. And I went to for 5 months, I basically went to my sunroom and read, I prayed, I just spent time sleeping and catching up. I went to the doctor and found out that they had put me on a new diabetes drug that pushed me over. And a lot of times for people's anxiety, there's a physical component, and your doctor can help with that. And so I'd really encourage people, to if they are having anxiety or panic, to get some help, because it's no embarrassment to say things aren't working out for me, and I'm not able to function on a daily basis anymore. You got to help me. And a lot of times the answer is so simple. You might have to take one pill, or you might have to go to therapy for 6 weeks or even 6 months, but who cares if you come away from there feeling so much better. And after 5 months, I was absolutely way, way better. And I was able to come back. Homeland Security hired me back in a surprise move. I didn't think I'd go back to the same place, but they put me in a different buying division, and it was easier than one they put me in, actually. But I think God let me see all that to find out what was at the root of my anxiety. And I put that in the book. I read books like Fearless, Max Lucado's book, just fantastic book. Jensen Franklin has one, Fear Fighters. I think it was just really impactful and helpful. And I took the best of all those things I read and put them in my book that said, hey, this gave me some comfort, some help. And I also have a proprietary, which means that you can't use it without paying. No, that's not true. I also have a system for analyzing what ails you and looking at the different areas of your life, and then coming up with concrete steps you can take to improve and to find yourself happier. And so, it was a great first book for me. I think everybody should start by writing their own story up to that point in their life, because you know the most about it and it's easiest to write.
I actually think that's great. I mean, that book really, especially with the diagnosis and the questions and the resources, I actually think you should re-release it, at some point in time, maybe with a little bit better cover. I'm just going to be honest, but to redo that again, I think it would really, it's so relevant and so necessary and needed, and just really having permission to say, I'm not okay. I actually saw a counselor in my late 20s and 30s, having a hard time coping with disability and aging. And I used to see a counselor at, a huge local church here in our area, so big, but just their counseling center was just a wonderful thing. And I had a counselor there that I saw for almost a year, a little bit over a year maybe, and she was just so wonderful. And it really was just talking, having someone to talk to, having someone that's objective, and really working through some of your problems and just the questions that people pose. And I've always thought about going back because it was so great. It was hard to see how great it was in the time. I'm just like, wow, I'm just talking and talking and talking. Nothing's really happening. But now that I, aged a little bit more and really reflected back on that, that really was important and a good thing, to do. And so I think that we're moving into a time where it is okay, to ask help, especially for men. Definitely, it's always been okay, for a lot of women, but in the African American community, it's really a taboo subject. And then I would think in the mostly male community that, it's kind of like, oh no, we don't talk about that. We don't go anywhere. We just, man up and handle it. And so, thank you for sharing that. That's really important. And hopefully other people will seek in the tools and resources that they need to also get help and to um, handle their issues that they're having and experiencing. So thanks. What are some of the pieces of advice that you have for, people that are just starting out, that just are, starting to write, maybe just they're journaling and they're getting ready to start really typing out things, and, especially this 2020, it's still very early in the year. What are some things? I hate when people just give you like, what's one piece of advice? It's like, that's not enough. So, you have free liberty to, give as many as you want, at least three, but do more than that if you want. What are some of those things that you might have even wanted to hear yourself as you just, were starting out on this journey?
Well, one of the books in my new book, Exercise Your Faith, talks about I tried having faith and it didn't work. I don't know if anybody else had this experience in their Christian walk, but I first heard about some of the faith teachers and I got their 3-step formula, and lo and behold, my car did not appear. My Mercedes did not show up out front. And I know other people it has, so I'm not discounting that it can. I'm just saying for me, that's not the way it worked. And so I thought, well, faith doesn't really work if you need something practical or immediate or whatever. That was the initial, kind of wrong conclusion I came to. But in writing, I think faith is 100% required, whether you're a Christian or not. You have to believe that what you're writing is eventually going to get out there and help someone. It can be, if you're writing a book, understanding the fact that you're in an era where it's easier than ever to publish your own book and put it out there. And God is able to use that to help people either on a small scale or a larger scale. Now with, with my book, Taking God to Work, so far we've, got about 6,500 or 7,000 copies out there that people are reading. And when I was, before I started writing, I would have said like a ministry where I'm impacting 7,000 people. That's like way beyond anything I could even guess or hope for, and yet, I'm like, well, gosh, it's not 100,000 seller, or we haven't gotten the Brinks truck pulling up in front of the house yet or anything. So I think having that faith that what you're writing is worthwhile. It may need a lot of work. It may need a lot of polishing. It may take you a year if you're occupied with other things, but it's worth it. And so I think that faith was something that God put in me from the very beginning. I went to that first writers conference. He showed me an editor. She did a fantastic job. I didn't understand that I also needed to get a copy editor. She was really doing a content edit. So when I do rewrite the book, I've got some improvement to do in some areas, but that was an amazing thing. When I met my cover guy, that helped my faith. That first cover, the guy was new at doing covers also. And we've grown up together. Like now his covers are way, way better. He did the last book as well. Same guy. He's getting better. Yeah. And I'm growing up too. And he still gives me special prices and gives me priority over newer customers and stuff. So I really like him. But, but there's things like that you learn as you go along. So don't think if you go to your first writers conference or you haven't even been to a conference yet and you feel totally lost, that there's not going to be a ton of people willing to help you. I mean, Tracee's here showing you on her videos how to do it. And, but there's many, many people that'll walk beside you and give you advice and help you for free. And then there's many more people that'll do it if you can help them with their expenses. So, conferences and stuff are well worth the investment. And I think, that's probably tip number 2 is, get some help. Don't try to do it all yourself. And then, the third thing is, giving it all to God, and asking for his help when you write. It's easy to create a mess and then hand it to God and say, like, okay, do something fabulous with this. But if we involve him in our lives every day, he makes the messes not so big. He helps us to fix as we go along. And the same is true with my writing. There's days where I can get stuck and I'll think, I didn't stop and pray before I got started this morning. I wasn't really in tune with the Spirit when I wrote that part, and boy, it shows. So I think it's good to to involve God in everything you do, and that's what the book "Taking God to Work" and the whole idea is about. Is that we need to bring God intentionally into our lives. He's there, he's listening. But there's times where we feel like the little boy pulling the wagon, and he said, God, this is so heavy, and why don't you help me? And he's like, well, I am helping you. But the little boy's like, well, get out of the wagon, and why don't you take it a while and I'll ride. But we don't always know what his help will look like. It may be another person that'll trade drafts with us and give us some critiques in exchange for some of their work. You never know, but get God in there.
That's right. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that all of those things are true. And like you were saying earlier, just, not taking the time to really prepare even your atmosphere and where you're at with the prayer and really set the tone. And even speaking, affirmations, before I even start to write, sometimes I'll say, I am going to write, 2,000 words, or I am going to do this, and it's going to flow and it's going to come through. And, I'm saying all this really to God, not just to myself, that this is how it's going to be, because, we come boldly before, the throne also, and just, make your requests and your petitions known, so that, you can have that bold faith. And just for everything, people are, I think, we pray and ask and seek God for all of the big things. And there are some things that are really small that we should also be asking for just a few words for the day to come and flow and to be right and to sound right. And it makes sense when we first put them down, rather than all the editing that has to come afterwards. What are some of your favorite parts of the writing process? For me, I hate editing, afterwards, after it's all done. It's like, I just wrote 300 pages. Isn't that enough? But then I go through and I print it out and I actually edit on paper. And then I also really dislike formatting. I'm only just learning how to format the work in order, for the interior part to fit into the book as it's supposed to be. Those two are just so nerve-wracking, but I really enjoy everything else about the book production process. What are some of those things that you dislike about producing your book and, getting it ready for publication and release?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I love the writing itself. I think the creative process can be a lot of fun. Thinking about, how do I get these characters moved along in the story? What is their quest? Where are they going? How are they feeling about what's going to happen? And that's a very fun part of writing. I think the stories in nonfiction, being able to tell, things that are interesting and fun. That's kind of the type of person I am. Tracee knows that if I get together with you, I'm going to talk your ear off if you don't talk mine off first. I love to hear stories from people, and I love to tell them, so that's the part I like. I have a tip, which is also something I like, and that is, I worried a little bit about writer's block because I had experienced it when I was younger. But I found the cure for that if you can get into your project, and that is start reading from the beginning and get back into the flow of where you were the last time you quit. Mm-hmm. And that really helps me more than anything. Sometimes I'd only do a few chapters, but sometimes I just start right back at the beginning, and you can edit a few little things on your way through if you see, oh, that doesn't connect, or oops, I called her Sarah here and now she's Diane or something. But but seriously, it's so great to be able to get back in the flow, and that's really it feels good, when you felt a little disconnected from a work and then you get back into it. And I don't hate the marketing part. Like, I like getting out and talking to people. Live events are usually a real bummer from a productivity standpoint, because you very seldom are going to sell enough books to even pay for what the expenses were to get where you're going. But you meet people and you see real people that need what you've done, and that's an amazing thing, to put the book in the hands of someone who's struggling with anxiety, or their job isn't turning out like they hoped it would, their career. And so I think that's a real rewarding part. My probably least favorite thing about the author journey is just how, if I had all the money in the world, I know of 1,000 other things I'd like to try for marketing and for getting the word out and everything else. But that's part of it too. You have to budget and do what you can do with what you have.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. So just some final questions before we wrap up for the day. I noticed that, you write nonfiction and you write fiction. Has using a pseudonym ever, come across, or something that you have thought about? One thing that I found just in my own journey is that it was really hard to get momentum for the one nonfiction book that I've written. I've written one, Pack Light, Thoughts for the Journey, and then I wrote a publishing action guide, which is more of a workbook, but also still nonfiction. And sometimes I wonder if that name change, obviously you haven't changed your name for the two different genres that you're writing, but if you had to go back, is it something you've ever thought about?
I have, and I normally think in terms of, will I, make it like my fiction is D.L. Winters, and the rest of me is having a name like David Winters. While it was wonderful in school because you could be anonymous, it sounds like where I went to school, at least, a normal name, and and all that. But there's a lot of David Winterses out there, and even other writers that are named David Winters. So that's that's crossed my mind. But when you first start, you don't know how high the mountain is going to be to climb,
Mm-hmm.
and it's high. If you're a beginning writer, if you really want to get to where you have a real audience that likes your stuff and follows you and all that, and you have to build up that trust between your audience and yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm writing this book from at least it sounds like it's for men. That there's a lot of women who aren't going to buy that book because they think, oh well, that's that's really more for men. And I build up my audience, mainly women, because that's who reads and pays for books a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time, and you have to do kind of what you think God's telling you to do. I really think I should spin off my fiction, and maybe when I come back to visit you in a year or two on your show, I'll have a story of how well that worked. But,
Yeah.
but
Have a billion followers by then.
But I have to give the women one reason they absolutely must buy my latest book, and that is, I tell women the one question you should never ask a man. It's in there. I violate the guy code by telling you.
Everybody will want to know that. But I actually think that there is a lot of books, perceived to be written by men, about men, for men, that can actually be, the women can help use that. And also the woman does, a lot of the selection process, especially for their spouse and their whole family, and picking things. So they're going to pick it up and maybe look through it. And if they wanted to help their spouse, their significant other or husband be, a little bit more confident, and only she knows kind of what are some of the internal, battles that he may be facing. And I think that that is one of the reasons for her to buy it, flip through it and say, oh yes, David has struggles with this, so I'm going to give it to him as a gift, or just give it to him only kind of, and keeping that secret code too, just in between them, as far as, as far as giving that to him and saying, I know this is an issue that you're having, and then this is in the book and it talks about it. So I think that, yes, you have that audience, but yes, you wrote this book, specifically for men, but I think it'll be mostly given to a man by, a woman saying, I know you're having this issue. So I think that it just doesn't matter so much. And you're also going to want to keep marketing to the women for that very reason. Alrighty, is there anything else that you would like to share? I'm so honored and thankful. Are there any questions I may have missed? I know I sent you some before, but I just also like to let things kind of unfold more organically, and also thought of some really great, interesting questions. But I appreciate your time so much today. What kind of parting thoughts would you like to share as we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say, if the audience that's watching this is a lot of authors, be encouraged and realize that God is going to use you to write what only you can write. We all think, wow, I wish I'd written that book when we see something that gets a lot of attention or just hits a real felt need for ourselves. And I want you to know that, I know God has a special purpose for you and a reason that he got you into this. And I know Tracee's done amazing things with her writing so far. She's been an encouragement to me when I have bumped into her a couple times at conferences and stuff. And I really hope that, you'll get into that fellowship too, and encourage some other people as well.
Thanks so much, David. You can find David L. Winters writing as himself, his full name, on sabbaticalofthemind.net. And you can also find...
Yeah, they're also on my website. And of course, Amazon, all these other places that you shop for books. Most of my books are there as well.
Be sure to get the new book, Exercise Your Faith, helping men and women, I would say, achieve greatness and confront the things that hold them back. Thank you so much again, David. I wish you the best. I'm sure our paths will cross again soon. Okay.
God bless.
Thank you.